Paying more money does not mean you're getting better sound. Hi-fi brands have shown us consistently in the last 5 years that you can get a wide variety of sound signatures, build, and looks for well under $500. More expensive and established brands like Audeze, Sennheiser, Beyerdynamic, Audio-Technica spend their efforts regurgitating what they've already done, for better or worse. But what about Japan? The Japanese electronics market is huge and divergent. In Japan, you can get all forms of headphones and IEMs, DACs, and amps, some really exotic stuff along with the traditional equipment the rest of us have access to outside of Japan. Have you wondered where all the unique Japanese audiophile gear is? Last year, I stumbled across a brand called Soundwarrior. These guys are based in Japan and make several headphones. I could not find their products in the United States, but was interested in trying their gear. A few weeks ago, I contacted Soundwarrior and asked about 2 headphones that they had just started marketing in the West. Soundwarrior sent me the HP20 and HP100 to review and return. Both of these headphones cost about $170. What can this relatively unknown brand with its unknown products offer to the audiophile market? Soundwarrior is not necessarily new to the headphone market. As far as I know, they've had a few headphones since 2017, but the HP100 and HP20 seem to be brand new releases in the US market. They claim that the HP100 and HP20 provide different experiences. Let's break down what we should expect from each. The HP100 is semi-open back while the HP20 is closed back. For the HP100, Soundwarrior says that you will get, quote, spacious and detailed music reproduction with a focus on accuracy. They say that the HP100 has excellent detail resolution with the ability to reproduce subtle details in the music. Soundwarrior says that this headphone will provide crisp mids and highs for vocals and instruments. They claim that the HP100 is ideal for mixing and practicing instruments. The HP20 evidently will, quote, capture even the slightest nuances for excellent sound. Soundwarrior promises that this headphone will provide smooth, detailed mids, relaxed treble, and open stage. The marketing says that the HP20 will render vocals and instruments with, quote, immense clarity and make you feel like you are listening to live music. For both headphones, Soundwarrior says their goal was to provide transparent sound for artists and engineers. Almost all audiophile companies have a problem describing what their products actually do. Soundwarrior's marketing is as vague as anybody else's. Both the HP100 and HP20 are plastic. The material is not flimsy or alarming, but something to be aware of. Soundwarrior says that they made a decision to use all plastic to prevent damage to your music instruments or other gear. The fact is that both headphones are plastic through and through, but surprisingly, they're sturdy. There's some similarity in build between these two headphones and the HD560S, although I think that the 560S has flimsier construction. The headphones have identical padding. The headband has sponge padding that is not particularly thick. However, they are soft and do provide some level of cushioning. The earpads on the HP100 and HP20 will turn heads. These are vastly different from any other set of earpads we've seen. Soundwarrior says these pads were designed specifically to the shape of your head. These are supposed to provide superior comfort. Of course, this also means that the earpads are proprietary. Both headphones come with a dual 2.5mm entry cable. The cables are pretty generic with typical rubber coating, and they do transmit some microphonics. As for comfort, I think you will be a little bit uncertain at first until you get used to the earpads. The headphones hug my head and there's moderate clamping force. The headband does not cause any discomfort, but I can feel its pressure. The earpads feel like, well, imagine you lay down on your bed, turn sideways so that your ears are pushed into your pillow. That's a fairly simple explanation of how these earpads feel. In essence, these earpads are on ear while at the same time sitting all around your ears. It's very different. I can wear both the HP100 and HP20 for about 2 to 3 hours without much difficulty. However, my ears do start getting warm after about 20 minutes. Overall, the HP100 and HP20 have no frills whatsoever. You don't get a protective case, a carrying bag, or anything remotely like luxury accessories. What you instead have is a utilitarian design and the basics. I suspect that most people will be perfectly happy with the fit of both headphones, but it will take time to adjust. Using non-traditional earpads is going to put some people off, however. For nearly $200, I would expect a little bit more. I understand these are principally aimed at professionals, but it is somewhat difficult to accept the lack of accessories in this price category, the same issue that I had with the HD560S. I wish Soundwarrior had included at least a carrying pouch. I tested the HP100 and HP20 using various gear. I used my Modi and Liquid Spark stack, I used the Army ADI2 DAC, and the hifi Zen DAC. I also used my Sony NW-ZX507 and the FIO M15. I used the stock accessories and listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. For this review, I decided to compare these two headphones side by side. I have only a limited amount of time with them before they need to be sent back. Consequently, for the sound test, I will provide comparisons back to back. By the way, both headphones are really quite easy to drive. A moderately powerful portable amplifier is more than enough for peak performance. Soundwarrior does not give any indication how the bass will sound on these headphones. In my experience, the HP100 seems to have a slight bass roll-off. The HP20 seems close to neutral bass, but probably with a smidge bit of mid-bass emphasis. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, both headphones reproduced the low rumble from the beginning of the song. On the HP100, the sub-bass was audible, but seemed to be somewhat recessed. Turning the volume up did make a slight difference and presented more sub-bass. The HP20, in contrast, had a greater emphasis in sub-bass, and I would say that the HP20's sub-bass was closer to neutral. Separation between sub-bass and mid-bass was greater on the HP100. The organ was clearer on the HP100, while it seemed recessed on the HP20. In Conquer by Overwork, there is a rolling marble sound at the beginning. It is supposed to pan from right to left to center. The HP100 recreated the sound of rolling marbles, but did not present the panning. The rolling sound also seemed to be a little bit recessed on this headphone. The experience was similar with the HP20, except that the marble sound was a bit less clear and a bit more difficult to hear. There are multiple drums in this track, and both headphones presented them. However, the HP100 was clearer, providing greater separation and clarity. Drum impacts on the HP100 were distinct, but they were slightly recessed compared to the HP20. The HP20, in contrast, had more audible drums, but each drum strike melded with the next on the HP20. I listened to several hip-hop songs, including Pure Water and Yupatek, Reel It In, and Uproar. The HP100 always made the sub-bass a step behind, a little bit recessed. It sounded like the subwoofer was at the other end of a very large room. So, while it was audible, it clearly lacked a bit of reverberation. The HP20 seemed to have a greater emphasis in sub-bass, and it made the subwoofer sound like it was closer to me than what I heard on the HP100. The HP20 was less clear than the HP100. Vocals on both headphones were about one step ahead of the instruments, although it seemed to me that the HP100 presented vocals more forward. I listened to my Sicario soundtrack and tried to listen for audible bass distortion. Neither headphone presented that issue. The bass was clearer on the HP100. Overall, if you're looking for true neutral, then I don't think either headphone will present that, if any headphone. The HP100 has a slightly rolled off sub-bass, while the HP20 is closer to neutral in that regard. However, the HP100 has clearer rendition of the bass region overall. Soundwarrior says that these headphones will present clear vocals that are smooth and detailed. In my experience, the HP100 seems to have close to neutral mids, the HP20 has recessed mids. In Orla Gartland's song Why Am I Like This, there is natural vocal grain and sibilance mixed into the track. The HP100 presented both, but did very slightly accentuate the sibilance. It was somewhat similar to the rendition of the Audio S4X. The HP20 seemed to smooth out the vocal grain and marginally roll off the sibilance in comparison. The HP100 had greater separation of all elements in the song, with Orla's voice standing further ahead of instruments. The HP20's rendition made the vocals appear about shoulder to shoulder or one step behind the instruments. All instruments seemed to have correct timbre on the HP100, and the HP100 was clear. The HP20, on the other hand, appeared to have coloration to vocals. Vocals were a pitch lower than they should have been, and I confirmed this when I compared again to the Audio S4X and even the Avantone Planar. In Want You Back by Haim, the experience was similar as with the previous track. The HP100 marginally accentuated sibilance, while the HP20 rolled off in comparison. The HP100 was clearer, providing greater separation of instruments and vocals. There are, by the way, two backup vocalists in this track, and the HP100 clearly presented their separate vocals throughout the song. The HP20 was not as revealing. Indeed, while I could hear all three vocalists initially, when the instruments played at maximum, the backup vocalists melded into one voice on the HP20. The drums were louder than any other instrument on the HP20 as well. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the HP100 seemed to correctly present the timbre and placement of the ukulele and drums. The bass appeared to be just a little underemphasized. The HP20, in contrast, seemed to add an odd pitch to the ukulele, like it was an octave higher than on the HP100. The drums were noticeably louder than the ukulele on the HP20. The HP100 seemed to present neutral rendition of the male vocalist sibilants. The HP20, on the other hand, slightly accentuated this detail. Between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds, there are sharp intakes of breaths, and both headphones easily recreated this detail. There is a backup vocalist whose voice is layered beneath the primaries. The HP100 did let me hear that second vocalist occasionally, while the HP20 did not at all. This detail is very difficult to parse out with most headphones, so the fact that the HP100 could present some of it is something to note. Overall, it is patently obvious that these headphones have different renditions of the mids. The HP100 seems to be closer to neutral, is clearer, and provides greater separation of all elements. The HP20 has recessed vocals that appear to have colored timbre. Soundwarrior does not say anything about the treble on either headphone. In my experience, the HP100 seems to have slightly elevated treble. The HP20 has similar energy, but the placement of instruments is quite different. In Scherzo for X-Wings, both headphones rendered the brass and horns clearly. However, it was patently obvious that the HP100 had greater separation and clarity. The HP20 simply made these instruments sound recessed. The nasally characters of some instruments stood out more on the HP100. The timpani sounded marginally emphasized on the HP20, but did not overwhelm the other instruments. Treble appeared to be a bit emphasized, particularly in the upper treble area on both headphones. This was not a significant deviation from neutral, but it was apparent when comparing against the Aventone Planar. In Flight from the City, the HP100 made the piano sound like it was about 8 feet away. Its bassier notes were well controlled and frankly a little underemphasized. The cello sounded smooth, and though it melded with the piano, and the piano was a little bit louder than the cello, I had no difficulty hearing both instruments at once. The HP20 made the piano sound closer to me, maybe about 5 feet away. The bassier notes were closer to what I thought was neutral presentation on this song, and certainly more emphasized than on the HP100. The cello was smooth on the HP20 as well, but it was not as clear as on the HP100. Both headphones presented the pops and sizzles and electric buzzing effects in this track, but the HP100 was noticeably clearer in this regard. Both headphones also presented the creaking of wood on the pianist's bench and the shifting of the cello's weight, and yet again, the HP100 was significantly clearer. In Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, both headphones properly presented the piano in the right ear cup, the drums in the left, saxophone center, and a bass a step behind. Without doubt, the HP100 was clearer and provided greater separation of instruments. The saxophone was a step ahead of the other instruments on the HP100. On the HP20, the saxophone seemed to be placed further back. The energy of the saxophone was very similar. The cymbals are supposed to provide different tonalities as they are struck at different parts. The HP100 did recreate these varying sounds, but the HP20 did not, and the HP20 made all the cymbal strikes sound identical. Overall, there seems to be similar energy to treble instruments on both headphones. I would say that both present close to neutral tonality, but with a slight emphasis in the upper treble area. Placement of instruments is quite different, however. The HP20 places some treble instruments further back, resulting in correct tonality but odd placement, meaning instruments sound so far away compared to the HP100 that it seems as if somebody accidentally pushed the instrument player all the way into the back of the room. The HP100, by the way, is also clearer. The HP100 and HP20 provide different detail and resolution from each other. If there's anything that is abundantly obvious about these headphones, it is that the HP100 is noticeably clearer in every genre I listen to. The HP20's recessed vocals and its different placement of treble instruments makes details more difficult to perceive on these general areas. Having said that, I cannot say that the HP20 and HP100 are incapable of rendering detail. It is merely that the experience is very different between them. The HP100 seems to provide obvious details and some subtle ones. The HP20 will provide obvious details, and you will be hard-pressed to pick up the subtle, nuanced details. The HP100 presented multiple vocalists, pops and sizzles, electric buzzing, sharp intakes of breaths, some layered details, creaking of wood, without any difficulty. But the HP20 made some of these details either harder to hear or drowned out altogether. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including the sound of children playing, wind, rustling of grass, piano, synth, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The Sennheiser HD800S presents 22 footsteps, the Focal Clear, 18. The Austrian Audio Hi-X65 presents 16 to 17. The Austrian Audio Hi-X55 presents 16 footsteps. The Hi-Fi Man Sundara, Avantone Planar, Sifka Phoenix, and Beyerdynamic DT1990 each present 10 to 11 footsteps. The Sifka Robin presents 9 to 10 footsteps. The audeze LCD2 Closed and LCD2 Classic each provide 7 to 8 footsteps. The Monolith M1070 and M1570 provide 8 to 9, and the older M1060C provides 7 footsteps. The audeze LCD1 and HD6XX present 6 to 7 footsteps. The Neumann ND-H20 presents 5 to 6. The HP100 presented 9 footsteps. The HP20 presented 6 footsteps. One of the reasons I use this test track is because it is complex. It uses many elements layered over each other. In my view, if a company says that their headphone would reveal all the details, the type of phrase audeze is well known for, I want to put that claim under scrutiny. I use the HD6XX's performance as my average starting point. When headphones perform above or below its mark, I judge them accordingly. Soundwarrior says that their headphones will reproduce subtle details. Well, maybe. The HP100 will do it more clearly than the HP20, that's for sure. Ultimately, it's fair to conclude that the HP100 provides above average detail, while the HP20 is average at best. As with a lot about the HP100 and HP20, these headphones also differ in soundstage performance. The HP100 is simply wider than the HP20. Neither headphone is anywhere close to the HD800S's levels of supreme soundstage, but that should not be a surprise. As with my detailed test, I use the HD6XX as my average performer for soundstage. Anything above or below gets judged accordingly. So, let's talk about that. The audeze Mobius and all Beats headphones I've ever heard have claustrophobic soundstage. The ND-H20 and ATH M60X have below average soundstage. The HD6XX and LCD1 have average soundstage. The Sifka Phoenix and Emotiva GR1 are average to maybe above average depending on the particular recording. The Hi-Fi Man Sundara, Avantone Planar, Austrian Audio Hi-X55 and X65, and the LCD2 Classic all have above average soundstage. The Hi-Fi Man Diva has wide soundstage, and the HD800S has super wide soundstage. The HP100 appears to have about average soundstage, similar to that of the HD6XX. The HP20, on the other hand, has below average soundstage. I have to be honest, I have no idea what Soundwarrior was aiming for with these headphones. I know that they claim that the HP100 and HP20 will provide accurate sound, but accurate in what way? If they were trying to achieve true neutral signature, then I don't think either hits the mark, but then again, no headphone actually touches that mark. Also, keep in mind that every time a manufacturer says their headphones will let you hear the music as the artist intended, that's a lie. Each recording artist uses different standards and tuning, and unless the manufacturer has a way of recreating the sound that was originally recorded, you're not getting what the artist heard. Anyway, both of these headphones from Soundwarrior have different divergent performances. One is not like the other. The HP100, for example, has slightly rolled off sub-bass but seemingly neutral mid-bass. The mids are close to neutral with a slight emphasis in sibilants. Timbre seem to be correct. Treble seems to be fairly close to neutral, though likely with a slight push in the upper treble area. The HP20, in contrast, has more sub-bass emphasis and a bit more mid-bass emphasis as well. It is not neutral in this regard, but I suspect it is not too far away. The mids are recessed, with vocals often sounding less audible than bass. Treble seems to have a similar amount of energy as on the HP100, but placement of treble instruments is quite different. I want to say that the HP20 makes some treble instruments sound recessed, but that gives the impression that the treble is significantly rolled off, and that I do not think is true. The HP100 is clearer, has wider soundstage, more detail, and seemingly more correct placement of instruments and vocals. The HP20, on the other hand, has below average soundstage, above average detail, recessed vocals, and treble instruments that appear further away from the ears. Going back and forth, there is a night and day difference between the HP100 and the HP20. Maybe the HP20 performs quite well for certain types of music or for a particular use scenario. It's not that the HP20 is a sub-bar headphone, it's simply quite different from what I think the vast majority of audiophiles are used to. The HP100, on the other hand, is more closely akin to typical audiophile headphones. So, as far as sound signature is concerned, I think the HP100 is close to neutral. The HP20, on the other hand, has a more U-shaped signature. In order to understand where the Soundwarrior headphones fit into the market, we should compare them as best as we can. In this section, I will do an A/B test between these headphones and the Allo Audio S4 and the Avantone MP1. For this test, I used stock accessories. I plugged each headphone into a passive A/B switch. That switch was plugged into my Army ADI2 DAC. I also used my Songcos LA-QXD1 paired with my Sterling HPA4. I tried to volume match, of course. I listened to my test songs on Amazon Music HD. The Allo Audio S4 seems to have greater sub-bass response compared to the HP100. Transients seem to be indistinguishable. The HP100 appeared to have more clarity in the bass region with slightly greater separation of sub-bass from mid-bass. Mid-bass impact was a little harder on the HP100. The S4 has slightly less vocal sibilance and places vocals a bit closer to the ears. The HP100 accentuates vocal grain a bit more than the S4. The timbre of instruments appears to be about the same, but the HP100 is clearer in the mids region overall. The treble was hard to distinguish between these headphones. The HP100 was marginally clearer and had a bit more instrument separation in the treble area. The HP100 has slightly wider soundstage and a bit more detailed retrieval. I also compared the S4 against the HP20. Sub-bass presentation was elevated on the HP20. The HP20 had longer decay. The S4 was clearer and had greater separation of sub-bass from mid-bass. The HP20 has recessed mids compared to the S4. The S4 was clearer and had greater separation of instruments in the mids region. The HP20 had a bit more upper treble emphasis than the S4, but the S4 was clearer. The HP20 placed treble instruments further back from the other instruments in a mix. The S4 is noticeably clearer and provides more detail than the HP20. It also has wider soundstage than the HP20. I next compared the MP1 to the HP100. The MP1 has slightly greater sub-bass emphasis. Decay and reverberation were similar. Bass clarity was very similar between these headphones. Mid-bass impact was also similar. Both had hard drum impacts without sharpness. Separation of sub-bass from mid-bass was marginally more obvious on the HP100. The mids are a bit different between these headphones. Both the MP1 and HP100 have forward mids. The MP1 seems to have just a tad bit more vocal sibilance, but the HP100 has a little bit more vocal grain. Instrument timbre appears to be identical, but the HP100 is a little clearer in the mids region. Treble response is different between these two headphones. The MP1 is closer to neutral, while the HP100 in comparison has a bit of an emphasis in the upper treble region. The MP1 has the same kind of detail retrieval as the HP100, but the HP100 has wider soundstage. I next compare the MP1 to the HP20. Both headphones seem to have similar sub-bass response. This, of course, was greater than the HP100's rendition. The MP1 was clearer in the bass region than the HP20. Reverberation and decay appear to be very close between them, however. Separation between sub-bass and mid-bass was marginally clearer on the MP1. Mid-bass slam is slightly harder on the MP1. The mids are vastly different between the MP1 and HP20. On the MP1, the vocals are forward, while on the HP20 they are considerably recessed. The timbre and pitch of vocals is more accurate on the MP1. The MP1 is noticeably clearer in this region as well. Just as with the HP100, the HP20 elevates treble in the upper treble region. It's not a huge deviation from neutral, by the way. The MP1, in contrast, was closer to neutral, but it was also slightly emphasized. The MP1 had greater clarity and separation of treble instruments. The HP20 placed instruments further back, almost like they were behind a bed sheet or a windscreen and the energy of the sound was being absorbed. The MP1 is clearer overall, has more detail, and slightly wider soundstage. A/B comparisons are fundamental to figuring out how a new piece of gear performs. Here, with the Soundwarrior headphones, we get a far better idea of how the HP100 and HP20 fit. All four headphones I tested here, the HP100, HP20, Olo S4, and Avantone MP1, all have their strengths and weaknesses. There is no perfect headphone. But the real question is what you want your headphone to do, what your budget is, and what you are willing to sacrifice. The MP1, for example, is a professional piece of kit. It was designed for studios. Its 3 voicing options, a feature I talked about in the MP1's original review, is a neat aspect that might be very helpful to professionals. But for audiophiles, the MP1 may not be much for consideration. Its chunky build, aesthetics, and tuning are all valid questions for the non-professional. You could have similar concerns for the S4, the HP100, and the HP20. Ultimately, you may hate all of these headphones or be impressed with just one, some, or all of them. I try to find unique gear as often as possible. Variety is a good thing, and we should all want more of it in the market. What you and I dislike, somebody else might love, and that's why we should have more options. When I stumbled across Soundwarrior's headphones, I was intrigued. I mean, the style alone is something quite different. Soundwarrior does not have much marketing involved in the US, and when I asked to review their products, clearly they were taking a risk. I appreciate Soundwarrior giving me a chance to try their gear. We have to figure out what these headphones were intended for. From what I gather, both the HP100 and HP20 were intended for professionals. Both headphones have a vastly different sound experience from each other. You simply cannot mistake one for the other. The HP100, for example, has a far more traditional sound and performance than the HP20. The HP100 has a neutral-ish presentation. It has above average clarity and detail and about average soundstage. The HP20, on the other hand, has close to neutral bass, but its mids response takes a huge deviation. There is simply no other way for me to say this, so I will just be blunt. The HP20 has scooped out mids. This results in vocals sounding off-timbre. The treble also has an odd placement of instruments. In both situations, it's almost like there's something between you and the speaker, and whatever that element is, it is absorbing a lot of energy and clarity. This may sound negative, but it's simply how the headphone performs. If you're looking for something different, then I suppose the HP20 is that in spades. This brings us to value. I think you could make a reasonable argument that the HP100 is value. At about $200, the HP100 has close to neutral sound signature, above average detail and clarity, and about average soundstage. You have to give yourself a bit of time to get used to the fit and style, but otherwise the headphone does everything competently. It is not an intimate, warm presentation like that of the HD6XX or the Audeze LCD1, but neither is it a smooth rendition like that of the Avantone Planar. So, yeah, I think the HP100 is arguably value. However, I really wish it had better accessories in the box. Those proprietary earpads are a real pain in the butt. Soundwarrior needs to provide a spare set in the box. You can probably find third-party earpads that will fit, but you will doubtless alter the sound signature for better or for worse. Now, these earpads aren't terrible. In fact, they feel fairly comfortable to me. It's just the fact that you may have to go out of your way to try to hunt for spare earpads that causes me some concern. Now, we turn to the HP20. Look, I'm sure somebody will find these headphones useful for professional application, but as a headphone for audiophile use? No, I don't think so. The HP20's overall performance is sluggish. It lacks clarity, detail, separation, placement, and correct timbre for its price bracket. I rarely say this about headphones and IEMs, but the HP20 simply rendered timbre of vocals way off the mark. It was nowhere close to accurate. Moreover, while energy of treble instruments seemed to be fairly similar to that of the HP100, I was quite surprised to hear that the placement was undeniably different. Every treble instrument sounded distant on the HP20. I really don't know what this headphone might be good at least for audiophile applications. On top of these issues, the HP20 has the same concerns as the HP100, namely the lack of proper accessories. Taken in the grand view, the HP20 is simply not value. For about $200, you can get greater clarity, soundstage, separation, detail, and more accurate placement from other headphones. And this is before we start considering the tonality, which will be rather divisive, I think. I can probably see myself using the HP100 in the future, but I cannot fathom spending $200 on the HP20.